Hi, hello, welcome. I'm joined here today, classic, stuck on mute. I'm joined here today with my friend Waterlight. My name is Stephen J. York, and that's a great start to a show, isn't it? Nothing like live theater here on the internet. Um, my name is Stephen York, as I said before, and I want to thank you all for joining us. I see a few numbers still ticking in. Um, I'm originally from West Virginia, and so is my friend Water. And we're going to tell you some stories today. And some of the story may sound a bit fantastic, but it's 100% true. Well, at least to the best of my remembrance. My father grew up in the coal fields of southern West Virginia. His father was a coal miner. His mother, my grandmother Thena, was the first woman in her county to hold a business license under her own name, something she was very proud of. She ran a diner for coal miners. And with a working mother and a coal mining father, my father spent a lot of time at his grandparents, Ida and William, his grandfather, for whom he was named for. They had a homestead on the top of Likens Ridge off Brush Creek, which suited my grandfather just fine. My father'd help his grandpa Bill every day with chores around the farm, and when they were done, they would spend hours interpreting each other's dreams under the shade of one particular willow tree until supper was ready. My great grandmother Ida hated cooking. So, round about supper time, Grandpa Bill would start getting sheepish and say something along the lines of, "Well, Ida, don't you think we ought to eat a bite or two pretty soon?" And at the mere mention of this, Ida would start cussing under her breath and banging pots and pans in defiance. So, my father and his grandfather would sit under that willow tree some days for quite a while to give her a wide berth. The willow tree had been struck by lightning many times, and my dad would ask his grandpa Bill why he hadn't cut it down, it being all gnarled up and scorched like that. Grandpa Bill said he could never cut even a limb from that tree. It'd be a sin. Now, he had logged trees before in his own property, but not that tree. And he said a sin like that, you'd have to pay for it in blood. He asked my father to never mention it again, but one day they would cut a limb from that tree. Grandpa Bill would smoke his corncob pipe, and Billy would watch the pipe smoke in the wind, and they would talk about their dreams and what they could mean. Grandpa Bill would dream of his mother, Grandma Liz, a lot. He believed that she'd come to him in dreams from time to time to teach him something, or else just sit a spell and visit. Grandma Liz was a bit of celebrity in those parts. Let me be a little more accurate. Grandma Liz is still a celebrity in those parts. Now, she and her husband Harmon relocated to the old home place from Kentucky on an ox-drawn wagon before the Civil War, when that area was still Virginia. Looking back through the census records, we can see place of birth, Virginia, Virginia, place of residence, Virginia, Virginia, and after the Civil War, place of birth, Virginia, place of death, West Virginia. But Harmon and Liz were from Kentucky, and they came on that covered wagon when Grandpa Bill was just 7 years old. Grandma Liz brought with her a whole manner of experiences and a wealth of knowledge about the old ways. Things her mother and her grandmother before her had taught her from the old country, as well as an extensive knowledge of herbs and plant medicines that they'd learned from the Native Americans. Combining these two made her a clever woman, as some people would call it. Other people might call it a granny woman, or sometimes just granny. Today, we might have called her a witchy woman, but she wouldn't have taken too kindly to that. As a boy, witches had a different connotation for my father. I remember him telling me his grandmother Ida once commenting on a five and dime trick that he had bought. It was a matchbox and it had toothpicks or matchsticks and holes that went through it, like that stage illusion of the woman in the box with the swords. And he had practiced and practiced in front of mirrors until he thought it was good enough to show his grandmother. He thought he'd impress her. Without skipping a beat, she looked at him after he finished the trick and said, "Billy, that's just a parlor room trick. If you really want to be a magician, you know what you got to do." She'd go on to tell him that at midnight on a Saturday, you'd have to go up to a cemetery, one that was near a fork in the road. And on the highest mountain overlooking that fork in the road, you would raise your fist to the sky, damning the Lord and praising the devil. And the devil would appear at the fork of the road. And if you walked down that hill and met the devil at the fork of the road, you could sign your name in his book, and then, Billy, you'd be a magician. You'd lose your soul for sure, but you'd be a magician. Grandma Liz was known to bring about all manner of magical and mysterious things. She was said to be able to cure mothers and babies. She was said to have cures for thrush mouth and colic, throop. She was able to stop a wound from bleeding, maybe one that would have needed stitches, just by saying a few words over it. She was able to make all manner of medicines and charms, like the one that she'd make to protect livestock from predators. But sometimes when night fell, trouble would come. Grandma Liz was said to be able to divine the location of water to dig a well, identify a thief through magical means. She was said to be able to help find lost items. She was known to remove hexes and curses of all sorts. When you were sick, you might go see a doctor, though the nearest one was more than a county over, so most people went to Grandma Liz for her herbs and remedies. But if you were hexed, well, you needed a hex doctor, so most people went to see Granny Liz all the same. My father was sickly as a kid. He had anemia and had to eat large amounts of liver. He had asthma, and Grandma Liz's herbs would help him a lot in breathing, but one summer he had an attack that was so bad he thought he was going to die. There are still people in that holler community today that know her name, even though she's been dead for more than 75 years. But that holler community isn't what it used to be. I don't mean to say that it should have stayed the same. Change is the only thing that's really constant, and 75 years is a long time for things to change. What I mean is, it's not there anymore. The nearest town to Grandpa Bill's homestead was nearly 10 miles away by car. About half that as the crow flies, but such is the nature of roads in Stonewall District, West Virginia. Stiltner, West Virginia. Special thanks to Philip Jones of the Historic Wayne County Society. Zip code 25512. Population 200 at its height. You could send them a letter, almost. If you ask Google Maps, you can still drive there, but I don't recommend anybody try it. These days, Stiltner looks a little different. You might notice that last few miles is a doozy. Be sure to bring your swim trunks. You see, after a series of devastating floods, Congress got the idea to start moving people out of the way, which seems to make sense, but rather than stop the coal, oil, and natural gas industries from clear-cutting the forests, blowing up the mountains, causing landslides, floods, and poisoning our groundwaters, instead, they passed a law to move the people out of the way of big business. A practice that still goes on today. I guess some things don't change at all. In preparation for today, I called a friend from high school who now works for a not-for-profit, Keeper of the Mountains, and I asked her what was the biggest threats to West Virginians? Strip mining, mountaintop removal, or fracking? Her answer? The politicians that allow all three. Not content to leave an ounce of soil unturned if there might be coal underneath it, these multinational companies start by clear-cutting all of the flora from the top of a mountain, removing all of the topsoil in the process. The trees are unable to be used commercially; it'd be illegal. So instead, they're burned, or sometimes illegally dumped into the valleys. Afterwards, millions upon millions of pounds of explosives are used to remove as much as 600 feet off of the elevation of a particular mountain. Blasting that, according to current practices, can be done as close as 300 feet to a home or residence up to 24 hours a day. All of that rock goes into the valley below. These valley fills have buried more than 2,000 miles of headwater streams and polluted many more. Afterward, the coal must be chemically treated and cleaned, a process that creates coal slurry or sludge, a mix of water, coal dust, and clay containing toxic heavy metals such as arsenic, mercury, lead, and chromium. In an area where a large number of people must rely on the private well water on their own land due to the lack of public service, it can come as a shock to many to learn that even the public water services in many parts of West Virginia are in violation with EPA standards for safe water. And there are frequent orders like this one from the governor in 2014, quote, "Do not ingest, cook, bathe, wash, or boil the water." All in all, more than 500 of the oldest mountains in the world have been wiped off the face of the earth, most of these in Kentucky and West Virginia. For a state known as the Mountain State, we're getting fewer and fewer each year. That's enough mountains that if laid end to end, it would stretch from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco. It took Congress some time to build their dam. You see, they passed a law saying that they would build dams and in order to stop floodwaters, but they had no way to pay for them exactly and no real plan to take the land. So by 1969, the well on Grandpa Bill's homestead was still fresh and cool and sweet. But eventually a dam was to be built, which would flood the entire community of Stiltner in the process. This is Stiltner, West Virginia today. The small mountain village is entirely underwater. As construction on the Eastland Lake Dam got underway, the government began buying out properties in a region surrounding the future lake site. Altogether, more than 22,928 acres of land would be condemned via eminent domain and taken to create the largest wildlife management area in West Virginia. Those families would have to leave their homes, and with it, the traditional way of life forever. One of those properties was Grandpa Bill's home place. And Grandpa Bill took the move hard. The farm was literally the only thing he knew. He had lived and worked on that mountain from the age of 7. It had provided everything they needed. Now, nearly 70 years old, he didn't really feel like he had much to live for. He died less than a year later. My Granny Theen always said that he died of a broken heart. By that time, my father was a senior in college. He was the first person in our family to seek a college degree, something that in many families would be celebrated, but in ours, or his, would actually drive a wedge between him and his family. See, they saw little Billy as getting above his raisin. That's their way of saying that they thought he turned his back on the family. Maybe it was a stress or grief, or maybe it was something more. But either way, shortly after Grandpa Bill's death, my father began having dreams of his grandfather. My father would have this dream over and over again. In the dream, he'd see his grandfather at the age he was when my father was just a boy. And they'd be out on the farm doing chores and visiting until suddenly my father, in a moment of lucidity, would remember that Grandpa Bill had passed on. My father would say as much, and shortly after, his grandfather would scold him and remind him he was trying to tell him something. Do you remember the spot on the path halfway between the barn and the house? Well, of course my father did. He'd been there 1,000 times. And in his dream, they would be transported there. I've left you something. I've left you something in the ground. And he'd point his finger into the earth, as though he'd buried something. Now, the strange thing is, Grandpa Bill was known to bury things. After the banks collapsed in 1929, he didn't trust banks anymore, and he was known to purchase silver and gold bullion, a habit that my father would pick up and pass on to me. Now, I grew up hearing many stories and dreams like this, but this was the mother of all of them. I mean, we had a real-life treasure on our hands. So I asked my father if he'd ever been back to find out what Grandpa Bill might have left him in the ground. He said no. He was in his senior year of college when his father had died, and he'd had the dream, and there was just way too much to lose. If he flunked out of school, he'd be the laughingstock of his mountain community. He'd be a pariah, an outcast. There goes Billy, got above his raisin. After he graduated college, he was busy trying to get a job and earn a living wage. Years went by. And he got married. Then he got divorced. Then he got married again. He had a daughter and then a son, though everyone agreed that the son was a little more handsome. He'd never been back. The house had been burnt down by the Army Corps when they took possession of the property. The roads were always hard to get up, but now they'd surely be overgrown. I asked him if he'd had the dream more than once, and he said, yeah, he had. He had it many, many times. I asked him, was it always the same? And he said, no. That each time he had the dream, it was similar. But it seemed like Grandpa Bill was getting more and more upset with him each time because he still hadn't returned to the old place. I asked him, well, what happened? Did he still have the dreams? And he told me that one day they just stopped. He figured maybe Grandpa Bill got tired of waiting on him. Now, my father had raised me like he was raised, to pay attention to dreams. They were messages, an opportunity to learn something or grow. Hadn't he raised me by sharing dreams and interpreting dreams just like his grandfather raised him? And here was the mother of all dreams, and he'd never gone? We had to go back. But we never did. Like so many dreams that we all have, it took the back burner. Life went on. I grew up. I moved away. I went to school. I got married. He grew older. In February of 2015, my father was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. At first, being an event specialist, I imagined myself organizing rallies and 5K runs. We're going to beat this, Dad. Then the reports came back from imaging. And they said that the number of tumors in his liver, lung, kidneys, spine, and pancreas were too many to number. The report actually said innumerable. I said, so what are we doing? And the doctor told me he was not a candidate for treatment. He would have no chemo. He would have no radiation. There'd be no 5Ks, no marches. He would wait to die. I was working, managing a theater at the time, a performing arts center in upstate New York, making far too little money for far too much work. It was supposed to be my dream job, and it just wasn't. And the only thing I could think was we never went back. So he and I began hatching a plan. So we planned to take Dad back to Stonewall District in Wayne County in the summer after things slowed down for me at work. But around my birthday in March, my sister called me. Dad had moved in with her in Ohio after getting sick, and she told me that if I was going to take Dad back to West Virginia, I had to do it now. He was getting worse by the day, and she didn't think he'd make it till summer. So I told my work that my father was dying, and I had to go. I'd help as much as I could while I was on the road, organizing events, but I had to be with my dad, no matter what that meant. So I rented a pickup truck at the local enterprise, and they asked me, towards the end, if I wanted the optional additional protection coverage. It's only $9.99 a day. And then I remembered the roads in West Virginia and where I might be trying to take this truck, and I said, absolutely. So I drove to Ohio to pick up my dad. Over the next few days, I continued to interview Dad as much as I could and get as much information as I could about the property, the house, the barn, our genealogy, and all the strange things that he had witnessed there as a child. We crossed the Ohio River as night started to fall. And when we arrived, Easter weekend in Wayne, we checked into the only motel there, the Pioneer. And we made an early start the following morning. We pored over maps and records and talked to everyone. Now, my father was a talker like me, and he talked to everyone. I remember as a kid, my father, we'd go to Shoney's after church, and my father would see someone and talk to them for 20 or 30 minutes about their family and about how their parents were doing and their job, their kids. And after they'd part, I'd say, Dad, who was that? And Dad would say, I don't know, I just met them. And that's how he was on this trip. For the first time in a long time, I saw my dad forget just a little bit about his cancer. He was still ill. He was really ill. He couldn't walk upstairs. I had to ask the motel to put us on a ground floor. We carried a little step stool because the pickup truck was too big for him to get into. On our last day in Wayne, Dad suggested I try to make it out to the old home place myself. It's government land, and he knew he wasn't strong enough to make the hike. So he would stay at the motel, and I would try and follow his directions. Mind you, this is land I had never been to. And when I say it's wild, it's wild. There's no cell phone reception. We had shortwave radios, but there was no chance those were working in the hills. I hiked for nearly 5 hours up and down this mountain. I hiked through the hollers and across creeks. It started to rain. It stopped raining. It started to rain again. It was wet, dirty, swampy, briar-infested work. And suddenly, just as I was about to give up, I sat down on some rocks covered in moss and took in this little piece of heaven. I wondered about my ancestors and how they settled this forest over 100 years before. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw an unmistakable rectangular patch of yellow daffodils. Now, I remember from school that nothing in nature grows at right angles, but here was Grandma Ida's favorite flower. The house and the barn were gone, but the flower boxes had dissolved. Couldn't find the willow tree, but the daffodils came back every year, as if to say, here was once a home. I scrambled back down the mountain, across the creek, went back up to the truck, almost got it stuck, got it out, and I returned to the motel. I was absolutely elated. I told my dad, I described the scene of how I crossed the creek at the waterfall, how I followed the path up to the J-hook, how, when I was there, I found the daffodils at right corners, how then I could almost squint and make out the path to where the barn might have been. And immediately my heart sunk. I didn't bring a shovel. I didn't bring a shovel. I didn't bring a metal detector. And I immediately apologized to Deb. He just sat there with the biggest smile on his face and reassuringly said, "But now you know the spot, and you'll find it one day." One month later, in May, be 6 years ago next week, my father passed away. I didn't make it to his bedside in time. I died in the car trying to get back to him. You see, after our trip, I went back home, back to work, busy. And just a few weeks later, when it was time for him to pass, I couldn't make it in time. I don't really remember the funeral. I delivered his eulogy. I have no idea what I said. My Uncle James said I did him right. After his funeral, I went back to life. No more time for dreams. Lots to catch up on. Lots of work to pick up on after leaving suddenly. Busy. A short while later, I was at a dinner party at a coworker's house, and the host of the party came up to me and said, "Gosh, Steve, I'm so sorry to hear about your dad, but I heard you got to take a great trip with him. Why don't you tell me about it?" Those are dangerous words to say to a storyteller. So I'm telling her the story, much like I'm telling you right now, and I mentioned how I wished I'd had a metal detector or a shovel. And a small crowd had started to gather. A few folks had come around to hear the story. And there was a man with a beard and a flannel shirt standing in the back with his arms crossed. And he'd been quiet this whole time, whereas others had asked questions for clarification. And it was at that point in time that he piped up and said, "Well, it was a good thing you didn't." "Good thing I didn't?" "Have a shovel," he said. "I sure would have liked to." He said, "Oh no, if you so much as waved a metal detector over that dirt, let alone disturbed the topsoil, you'd be committing a felony. That's government land. It's not your family's anymore. Now, you could do it, but you'd need to file an ARPA permit, and you'd have to have permission of the Army Corps of Engineers. There'd have to be an impact study done, and that would have to be submitted." Whoa. I'm sorry, dude. I don't know anything about that stuff. "Well, I do," he said. "Who the hell are you?" "Oh, my name's Dwayne. I'm an archaeologist." Now, Dwayne goes on to tell me about his work at Stonehenge and how it kind of made his career, but it effectively pulled him out of the field. He'd gotten into archaeology to be a real-life Indiana Jones, but now all he did was kind of push papers and rubber stamp grants and approve other people's trips to do the work that he wanted to do. He longed to get his hands dirty again. "Now, if we're going to do this," he said, wait, we? Are you volunteering?" "I guess I am." Now, the host was absolutely in stitches at this point, and she mentioned that she thought it would be a fantastic documentary film. I agreed, but I was a theater guy. What do I know about film, let alone documentaries? But you see, in my mind, I was already referring to this project as Thick and Peculiar Mist. It's a line from an Edgar Allan Poe short story, The Tale of the Ragged Mountains. My father studied literature in college, and he used to read those spooky, macabre stories. Poe had spent some time in Appalachia. In fact, he once petitioned Congress to change the name of our country from the United States of America to Appalachia. The Tale of the Ragged Mountains is about a man who has a fever, and he gets lost on this mountain path, and as he's at the top of a crest trying to get his bearings, he looks out, thinking he'll have full sight of where he is. But hanging in the hollows and across the crests is a thick and peculiar mist that obscures his view. That night I talked to my wife about pursuing this. Could this actually be a thing? Could I actually make a documentary film? And she suggested I talk to her coworker, Jake Dodd. Now, he taught cinema and screen studies, but that's all I really knew about him. I knew he was a tenure-track professor and he had 2 young kids, so I doubt he'd be able to help, but maybe he could put me on the right path. So I emailed Jake and we scheduled a meeting for a little later that week. Now, the day came for us to have our meeting, and I parked on campus. I got my visitor's pass, but I realized I didn't know where his office was. So I picked up my phone and I Googled which building. Now, I found his office, but lo and behold, I also found his bio. And not only did he teach cinema and screen studies, but he actually specialized in documentary filmmaking, specifically documentary films of family histories. Beyond that, he did some work in his master's, a dissertation, I believe, on the life of Edgar Allan Poe. It involved some archaeological work where he got to work with real artifacts from Poe's life. The coincidences were too many, and as I spoke to him in his office, he agreed, like, his wife may kill him, but he was in. I've got an archaeologist. I've got a cinematographer. And this started a string of circumstances, coincidences, opportunities, whatever you want to call them, things that lined up. That ARPA permit, that impact study, riddled with red tape and issues. At one point in time, I found myself just 2 weeks before we were scheduled to go to West Virginia, talking to a general at the State Department in Washington. They wanted $25,000 for a permit. Why? Because the East Lynn Lake Wildlife Management Area that was now the larger piece from my family's property contained a dam. They were afraid the dam had terrorist tendencies if we were recording there. I just started telling my story, and every time I started telling my story, I got transferred, and I got transferred, and I got transferred. And eventually I got fairly high up the chain, and everybody kept putting it up the flagpole until eventually the general said, "This isn't a problem." And it just went away. So that night, long before any of that, I had talked to Jake. I went home, and I had a dream of my own. Now, in this dream, I found myself in a van with half a dozen people or so on a trip. You know, it was one of those 12 or 14 passenger vans with a cargo area in the back and the bench seats. Now, we'd made a quick stop at a rest area in this dream, and it was one of these dreams where I didn't really know what was happening, but I thought I could figure it out through context. And there was a short gal with a clipboard, and she said, 5 more minutes and we're back on the bus. And I thought, ooh, she knows what she's doing. I'll follow her. And a few people had gotten some luggage out of the back of the van. Somebody was getting a stick of gum, somebody else a snack or a book for the second leg of the trip. All right, 5 minutes is up. Back in the van. And as we formed an assembly line, passing things back to go into the cargo area, I heard a voice to my left. I heard the voice first, fitting for a storyteller. It was a voice I recognized, but I hadn't heard in some time, and the voice said, "Are you ready to go?" That was it. That was the whole dream, but that voice was my father's, and I knew he was there helping us load the van, and it suddenly became clear to me, like a flash of lucidity, like my father's dreams of his grandfather. I knew what trip this was. We were on our way to southern West Virginia. We were on our way to Stonewall District to find whatever was buried in the ground off of Brush Creek at Grandpa Bill's land. So maybe that dream was guilt. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was something more, but I couldn't deny it. The next day I woke up and I drafted a letter of resignation, and I quit my job at the theater. We've been down to West Virginia 3 times now. Dwayne keeps telling me we need more people and more time and more money. 3 days at a time isn't going to cut it, he said. We need 3 weeks to start. What I first thought would be a relatively short project, I now realize might be my life's work. I dreamt of Dad and Granny Thena a lot after he died. It took me a while. But starting in December of 2018, I began a dream journal. At first, I wouldn't really remember much of my dreams. It was more circumstantial. You know, you were there and you were there, like that final scene in Wizard of Oz. You were there and you were there. But the more I wrote, the more I'd remember, as if my mind was anticipating the chronicalization of my dreams. I now have multiple dreams a night, sometimes in so much detail that is so clear and so rich you can actually taste it. I have more than 1,000 dreams recorded over the last few years. 1,000. It's my hope to start a website to share them with others and encourage other people to start the process of journaling and watching their dreams. Now, I don't have time to tell you 1,000 dreams tonight, but I can tell you some of them have been so fundamentally profound, so touching and transformative that I'd wake in the morning and just weep. I realized a few things in this practice. I realized that if I didn't write down my dream immediately upon waking, I would forget it. It'd be completely gone, poof, without a trace, like the thick mist on top of the mountains. It would dissolve. I also learned that there's hardly ever a silly dream. Even dreams that I thought were useless or nonsense, upon writing them down, I discovered there was potentially a deeper, more profound meaning. You see, in the beginning, I think I was eager to put my dreams to rest, to let them stay in the realm of the dream world, so I could get back to my life. Now I don't feel that way. I'm making my dreams my life. I'm bringing my dreams to life. I believe no dream is too small. And 6 years ago, I took the first step to bring my dreams to true. Now, some people might call that foolish. Water calls it medicine. I call it magic. You can call it what you will. But I want to know what happens when we allow ourselves to dream just a little bit more. What happens if we were to give our dreams, both literal and figurative, just a little more attention, just a little more space? I learned to give my dreams more space, and when I do, amazing things happen. I can share it with others, and when I do, incredible things manifest. My story doesn't have an end yet because I'm still chasing this dream. It lives on in me. And now it lives on in you. While I may have only found an old pocket knife and a bunch of trash over the last 3 archaeological trips, I've already found the treasure. I found family members I never knew I had, like my second cousin, Paul McKay. She's a bit of a genealogist, and she welcomed us into her home and showed us family photos and told us all about her family and my father as a boy. She's a living record of our family, and she may be the last one. Through this process, I've gotten to do incredible things and meet incredible people. I've heard stories you can hardly believe. I've met people that didn't know me from Adam that would do crazy, impossible things with me. People like Dora, a mysticism specialist from Southern West Virginia that we met up with, who helped us early on in the process when we were talking about Grandma Liz's rituals and herbal remedies. People like Rodney Parker, pictured here on the left with Dwayne and Jake, who bent over backwards to help us with the ARPA permit and the Army Corps of Engineers, because after I told him my story, it resonated with him, and he revealed to us that he's always wanted to do something similar. The serendipity and the synchronicity have not stopped. So my dad may have not left me a treasure map to a box of gold buried in the hills, but he had already given me a greater gift, a life full of stories and dreams.
Along the way, all the
My father provided the stories that fed my soul, but the courage to pursue my dreams came from something else, something older. It took me a while to realize this, years actually, but it actually occurred to me one morning after a dream. What occurred to me was that the greatest gift I ever received was my father's untimely death. Because of this gift from the universe, and I call it a gift because it was, because of the pain of losing him, the guilt of not being by his bedside, the grief of not having him in my life, and having this big dream left undone, I had to take a look at my life. I had to start asking more questions. I came face to face through that pain with my own mortality, and it started making me ask the question, what stories was I telling? What dreams was I pursuing? Would I be like my father at the end of his life, having never done the one big thing? Through this process, I found my heart. I found my love and my creativity. I found my purpose. Frankly, there's not a part of me, personally, professionally, romantically, spiritually, that hasn't grown and developed and changed over the last 6 years for the better. Coming through that pain wasn't easy, but in doing so, I found me, and I'm finding more of me every day. I would have liked to have my father longer, but I know if a devil appeared to him some dark night on a crossroads near a cemetery and gave him two choices, one, to live another 100 years in perfect health, or two, to die inside of a year, but to give his son that kind of gift, I know he'd pick the latter. I don't get to see Dad the way I did anymore. But sometimes, when I close my eyes and I prepare for sleep on a dark and misty night, I get to see him. And Granny Thena, too. Sometimes they teach me things, or help me through a rough patch. And sometimes we just sit for a spell and visit. So what happens from here, you might be asking? I don't know. I've got some ideas. I've even got a few dreams. But this is a living story. It's based on a dream that was inspired by a story about a dream. That sounds radical and crazy, and it is, but it's mine. And now it's yours. I appreciate you listening, because what's a story without somebody to hear it? If you have the courage, I encourage you to follow your own dreams. That way, one day, we can gather around a fire, even if it's a digital fire like this, and we can see how our dreams have grown. Thank you, and good night. So, I've been asking a lot of questions here, and interviewing you a good bit. Did you ever think you'd be telling everybody all this?
No. And I'll be honest, I didn't think I could remember a lot of things. But since we started talking on this trip, it just seems to just keep bursting out of me. And names I'd forgotten come to me. And then that leads off to something related to that. And it's just like a flood coming out of it. It's amazing. I never thought I'd be telling everybody all this. I've shared a heck of a lot of information with you.
What would you say to somebody, a non-believer, I guess, somebody that disbelieves?
In what?
Yeah, some of the stories or whatever.
Oh, okay. Well, you're going to have that, because some of the stories are going to sound fantastic. But they're 100% true to the best of my remembrance. They really are. I know some of them are kind of spiritual stuff, but they're true. They're just strange things I had a family that was secretive and lived a kind of an isolated life, and they behaved strangely is one reason. And you know, it just ordinary people probably didn't have some of these experiences.
Okay, folks, thank you so much for coming today. We're going to start our talk back in just a couple of minutes. If you'd like to join us for the talk back, you can join the conversation on YouTube Live. I've got the link here below. You can also join us on Facebook Live. It's facebook.com/thick and peculiar mist. Either one works. We're actually streaming on 4 platforms today. We're streaming on our website, as well as the SUNY Oswego events page, as well as Facebook Live and YouTube Live. So if you are on our website, there should be an option towards the bottom right corner where you can click that button, and it should say view or watch on Facebook, or otherwise towards the top left, you should be able to click on the title, and it should open there. Alternatively, you can direct your browsers to facebook.com/thick and peculiar mist. And then you can join the conversation. You can actually chat with us. You can send us messages, ask questions. I'm joined here today, as I mentioned before, Waterlight, our tremendous composer and a wonderful friend of mine. And we also have our director of cinematography, Jacob Dodd. So we're here for you. And I see a few folks. Hi, we are here. Hi, people. So a few of you have figured it out so far. If you'd like, you can insert your messages. I'll say insert your message here. There we go. And that should pop up there for you. So I think we'll just chat here until a few questions come in. Feel free to chat there as you like, and we'll be reviewing those and asking our folks there. Our archaeologist, Dwayne Quates, wasn't able to join us today, and neither was our director of puppeteering, Christopher Mullins. But as I said, we got a lot of Waterlight. Water, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to ask a question. Water and I have been working for several weeks. This portion of the project, in fact, the addition of music to the greater show has actually been something that's been probably one of the longest and shortest parts of this show. Longest because we started this process well over a year from now. Ago, and then the pandemic hit. So originally, Water was going to join us, and this was a staged show. And Water, I wonder, Water and I have talked a lot. Water and I are friends. We talk back and forth, and through the processes, it's changed. I see Jake smiling down there because Jake, I'm sure, he knows exactly what that's like. How many times this process and this project has changed gears. And I just wonder, Water, I'll start with you. What's your what was your thoughts about that when we came to you to compose music for the show, and then a pandemic hit? What's your thoughts? Oh, I can't hear you. I wonder if others can. Uh-oh. Technical difficulties, folks. I can't hear you, but I'm wondering if others... Jake, could you pop on maybe? I can hear you.
Oh, I'm here. Do you hear me?
I can hear Jake.
Okay. Okay, good.
So maybe I'll pose that question to you, Water, maybe while you work on that on your side. I'm not sure what's happening there, but I'll pose that question to you, Jake. This process from when I came to you in 2016 or 2015, and kind of spoke to you about this. This has gone quite a ways, from where it started. Well, I wonder what your thoughts are about that.
When you start a film like this, it's all about discoveries. And, at one point we were trying to make this into a documentary feature and get it, looking at venues like, like a PBS, like an hour-long kind of, documentary special. But then it started becoming more, I think, the intimacy of the story and lending itself to these sort of short vignettes. And when we would go down to West Virginia, we would catch different little details about the, during the site or the people. So it started to become more about this community that has been lost through your father's experience, than this sort of big sweeping, examination of eminent domain and the of losing the land. It became more about the people and the earth, and particularly, you rediscovering your family. And I think that's what's just so compelling to me, is that there's always something more to be seen, something more to be revealed, by looking and meeting and connecting.
Yeah, I think that's a really great. Again, we keep coming back to this metaphor, that's present inside of the title. Water, how we doing over there, dear? You know what's No, oh no, we lost your microphone. I wonder what's happened. Let's see. We'll try and mute you and unmute you. I'm not sure what's happening there, but yeah, through this process, we've that metaphor exists, right, over and over, thick and peculiar mist. In so many ways, Water and I were talking the other day about. She even mentioned, like, could this be could a thick and peculiar mist, could that be a ghost? Is that what a ghost is? We're talking about loved ones who have passed on, and their ethereal nature and their ability to come and go, and the idea of dreams themselves being very ethereal and impossible to really nail down. But indeed, we have an entire community in which it was there one day and it was gone the next. So I've got a few of you coming in with chats here. We've got Kevin. Laura says Kevin wants to know when the next excursion is and if he can help. Thank you, Kevin and Laura. We would love that. In fact, hey, shameless plug time. If you have the ability it would be so kind of you to make a donation for our next pursuit. This project is always been by the seat of our pants. It's kind of incredible. The things that we have overcome. I spoke earlier about that was the longest and the shortest experience. I hope Water doesn't mind me sharing this, but we've been talking about this for well over a year, and the pandemic happened and it was on pause. And I remember her saying to me early in the process, it was probably in March or April of 2020, and she said, have you considered this maybe not being a staged show? I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, with everything going on right now, you think that, the theaters will be open? And I was like, psh! I was like, the pandemic won't last forever. And then a year passed. And here we are. But in her process, so in some ways, Water's been a part of it for well over a year and a half, and yet when it really kind of came down to it, she kept saying, give me stuff. I need material to work with. Art begets art, right? And towards the end, I finally started getting her some materials, and she shared with me that. So one of the sequences, I knew we wanted to use dulcimer. Dulcimer was my father's favorite instrument. And she went from deciding that she wanted a dulcimer in a specific song to writing the song, sourcing a dulcimer that we volunteered. Special thanks from the folks at the Tamarack for that, Tamarack, West Virginia. Sourcing a dulcimer and recording the song in less than 24 hours. Something that is just radical when we look at the shadow puppetry sequences that Jake and I did with Chris, our puppeteer. Chris Mullins, our lead puppeteer, director of shadow puppetry. So much of that project was talking, and then the actual events took place in something like 5.5 days. And the majority of that work was in the last day and a half, with Jake and I hand developing film in a bucket at after midnight in a laboratory.
1 a.m.
Yeah, 1 a.m. So just for it to be scanned the next morning and edited and for played for a live audience the next day at 6
Yeah,
p.m. Jake,
it
I
was
wonder,
16
could you
hours.
tell us a little about that? I'm wondering if folks are curious. I know I'd be curious about the process. The film, I showed this film to some folks, and some younger viewers were like, what are all the white streaks across the film? Could you tell us a little about that
Yeah.
process?
First, I want to say just thanks, Water, for really bringing these images to life emotionally. I think that you have the voice of the community, of the voice of the people who lived on these home places, and that was something in this version of it that Stephen and I were just saying, we do something needs to happen here with the images, and it needs something else. So the story needs to come through a little more stronger emotionally, and the music just did just that. It really pulls you in so wonderful and captures that magic and dreamscape so well. So I just wanted to point that out. Um, as far as the actual process of working with film goes, it was actually really unique, which is what I love about this whole project, is that everyone can add their story to it. And when Christopher came in and designed the puppets and did the performance with film, so we used 16 millimeter film, and what we did was, first of all, the lights were very dim, so we had to shoot the film at 12 frames per second, 16 frames per second. Sometimes a lot of it was 12 frames per second. So normally you're filming at 24, so we're shooting at half the speed, and that it turns into fast motion. But being that it's puppets, we can get away with that, because of that they're flat two-dimensional images moving across the screen and not people, where you would notice if it was strangely moving in a more erratic way. So that was part of the process, was shooting in low light and capturing the puppets in that way. And then what we did was we hand developed the film. So what you see with the light streaks, that is the film touching itself. So it's another way that I always say that film collaborates with the filmmaker when you work with celluloid, traditional 16 millimeter film. So as we develop it, and washing off this, the silver that wasn't exposed to light, and you're fixing other silver to the film, the film can touch itself, and you'll see a few times where it actually creates its own double exposures. So Stephen and I actually just a 5-gallon bucket, put the chemistry in, put the film in, mixed it up like soup, and shaking it around midnight, and then hanging it to dry. And so what happens is you're getting the chemistry is not developing all parts evenly. And then when we hang it up to dry, it can dry and sometimes fold against itself. You see the film hanging behind me, imagining it's wet and it's curled up in this drying, a dryer, and then it can touch itself, and then you pull it apart and it pulls some of it itself onto other parts of itself. So you get this again, it's this sort of beautiful element. The film is actually contributing to the process, and it's a sense of discovery too, just like how the whole project is being made. It's just we're going at it and seeing what we find,
Yeah.
and being open to it. That's the
That's a
key.
really wonderful. You mentioned chemistry. I want to go a step further and talk about this because, from what this was all new for me. With film, I've never developed, chemistry by hand. And when I mentioned chemistry, I just kind of want to point out what this process was. So normally, when you shooting on celluloid, shooting 8 millimeter, or 16 millimeter, or 35 millimeter, or even 70 millimeter is really rare. And Jake specializes in that. And we decided early on that we wanted to shoot as much as we could with celluloid, to really see what we could find with that. It is incredibly tactile, right? You can feel, especially some of those things out on the mountaintop. And Jake said early on that we wanted the means for creation to match the technology that would have existed in the time that the people that we're talking about lived there. But going back to the shadows, because the light was so low, like so much of it was, normally you would film this under very controlled circumstances. I mean, film is all about controlling light, and how it gets exposed to the film. And we're in a dark room. And I remember at one point in time, Jake saying, can we turn up the lights? And since we're filming in shadow puppetry, we're filming the absence of light. The answer is no. If you turn up the lights in the room, the shadows disappear. And so we had Chris there, our director of cinematography, who was kind of freaking out, and everything was discovering on the way. And Jake is over there, cool as a cucumber. He's like, well, I can get a larger
Aperture.
I can get a larger aperture, but I'll have to use a different camera. But I think I have a camera, but it doesn't have this, and that'll get more physical light into the camera, and then we can slow it down, but it's all on film. And so right up to the moment that we had wrapped, we only have one go at this stuff, because once the film is exposed, it's exposed. But right into the moment that it came out of the bucket at 1:30 or 1:45 in the morning, we had no idea if we had anything at all. We could have done this entire that whole portion of the process and come out with nothing. And the whole reason that we hand developed it, I love how cool and tactile it feels, and you often see those that noise or those burns, as an effect added. And this was genuine. This is authentic. It's there, and the reason that's there is because normally you would send your film out to be developed, and it would be touchless, and there would be no marks, and there would be no noise, but we didn't have time for it because we needed to go from no puppets to puppets with lighting, with light performers. What you don't see there's behind those sequences, there's 4 or 5, 6 people holding lights and puppets, some puppeteers holding 6 or 8 puppets in each hand, moving guides and scenery, all behind the scenes. And then you've got the camera crew in front of that screen trying to capture as much light as possible to then just be, to be developed on a black and white film with color chemistry, I think is what we did, right?
We had black and white chemistry, but it's meant to make
positives.
We typically, we would use it we shot positive film and then we processed it as a negative and scanned it. And so because we were using traditional darkroom chemistry, that's where the question mark is. As we were getting the images, we're like, if this was going to a lab, we were going to be set. But we were experimenting with using chemistry that is not normally used for this particular film. And then we had to adjust for the speed. We were treating the film as if it was, I think we were treating it as 400 speed film, but it was traditionally 200 speed film. So we were also pushing it in the process of developing it longer in the chemistry. So it was fun and that exciting, and that's the thrill of film it is tactile. There is like on the edge of fragility. And it was the lowest light I've ever worked in, and that was cool too to see how it came out, because Christopher had those very special flashlights. And so if we were to bring in a bright hot light, what would happen was sometimes we get not a clean shadow, and he couldn't control it like he could control it with his hand. So we really had to adjust ourselves so he could do the best work. And so that's, and again, in cinematography, you're always, the director and trying to support the vision and making what adjustments you can technically to get that out. And so kudos to Christopher for sticking to it and using his tools and really encouraging us to problem solve.
And yet again, it fell into place. We've got a comment. I heard Water just came back on. We got a comment from Ola. The vocals are so pretty. What made you decide what to underscore with music and vocals? Would you like to speak to that, Water?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Do you know what was the problem?
What was the problem?
For future reference, I have an iPhone, and you have to go into settings, and under audio input, it was chosen like automatically as default.
Oh,
you have to choose iPhone microphone.
Not default.
Right.
That's
and
not
that
the
will
default.
Turn on. That will make it possible. That's the magic. So yeah. Why did I choose what I chose? I didn't. I truly believe that. My approach to music has always been me operating as a vessel. And it sounds spiritual and woo-woo, and people are like, bullshit, you're crazy. And maybe I am. But I really think that it's like a pure source of sound when I get out of the way. I take the same approach to writing, really. And I think a lot of artists do that. Our ego can really limit our potential and limit a pure source of expression. So and performers battle that issue as well. You know, they get caught up in their heads, and then they'll forget their lines, or they won't be in the present moment. And it goes back to this whole mindfulness approach that you really take, Stephen, in your work. It's really about that. There's a special ability to be present and also be a vessel. And I think healers do that, doctors. I think any person who's very good at the profession that they do, whether they're a farmer or a veterinarian or a human rights activist, you know, they're very much here in the present, but open and allowing themselves to be a vessel for some greater, whatever you want to call it.
You
Art.
mentioned,
Yeah.
You mentioned, you know, whether you're a farmer or a civil rights advocate. A fair amount of this project deals with environmentalism. That wasn't always the case, but I don't think it's something that we can deny in the history of West Virginia. And Kayla, you yourself have been involved a great deal in that community, in the environmentalist community. And I wonder if you'd speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. Again, I don't think that's really a choice. Human rights work usually involves us when it affects us. Rarely do you find or affect someone we know or someone that we love. Right. And as we know, Stephen, you know, your father's one of many that dies of cancer at an early age. And you can call it genetics, bad genetics. They love to blame it on everything. But the reality is people in West Virginia live in poverty. They live under economic and environmental destruction. They're roped in and brainwashed solely and convinced to be prideful for the hard work that they do, giving their lives as coal miners to, you know, energize and give power to the rest of the country or other countries. And then when they're ready to retire because their bodies can't work anymore, not because they don't want to work anymore, but because their bodies can't work anymore, they're let go. Or they're promised Medicare, or they're promised health care and rights that they've worked for are stripped from them because guess what happens? The coal companies magically overnight go bankrupt. And do you know how many times this has happened? How many times they go bankrupt, sell out to another coal company who now puts in new permits to do this again in other communities. And so really it's not about me trying to be a hero. And this is across all levels of activism and human rights work, whether it's working on the front lines of social justice with racism, or, you know, fighting discrimination on many levels. It's because we're personally involved. It's because it personally affects us, and it's because we don't have a choice. You know, if I'm going to live here, if I'm going to raise my children here, if I want to garden here, if I want access to clean drinking water, if I want to breathe, even these very simple things, I have to fight for that. Yeah. It's not some, you know, free thing that's given to me now. So that's really what has pulled me into it. It was this moment and realization that I don't have a choice. If I'm going to stay here, I have to do this.
I think that's very noble. I think that's very, very impactful that you share that with us. I think so many of us are drawn to action and drawn to our work. That's very much how I felt about this project. And so hearing you say that really resonates with my motivation through this whole project. I have to do this. You know, it's an obligation to do this. It's interesting, actually. I didn't have time to add it to the show, but just today, as I was making some final edits and tweaks, the wildlife management area, the East Lynn Lake Wildlife Management Area, the 22,000 odd acres that was taken eminent domain, that was taken in the name of clean water. That was taken in the name of reducing harm through floods that were caused by the mining industry. But in 1999, Senator Joe Manchin actually made it legal, I guess illegal, for the Army Corps of Engineers to weigh in on permitting requests for mining on public lands. So the Eastland Lake, since 1999, the Eastland Lake Wildlife Management Area, a piece of land that was created by condemning the property of people in the sake of clean water and safety, has now had hundreds of petitions by coal mines to be mined. So we see a pattern of we mine the land, we move the people, we take the people's land, and then we'll try to mine it again. It's the only public land in the U.S. that the local authority, which in this case is the Army Corps of Engineers, doesn't have a say on those permitting processes. So, and that's as early as 2008, I think the last attempt was. And again, to use explosives within 300 foot of a dam that's protecting this community is just ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. So I wonder if so. Keep your comments coming. If you have a few more, I'm going to go through these. Once again, we're on YouTube Live at youtube.com /user/SJ York. Not the cleanest thing. Might be a little easier to see us over on Facebook.com /thick and peculiar mist. Once again, you just heard from Waterlight. That's our folk medicine musician. You can learn more about her at facebook.com /Waterlight Music. And we've been talking with Jake Dodd, our cinematographer and independent filmmaker, about the process of making The Sound of Mist a thick and peculiar mist experience. Let's see, we've got a few more questions here. A lot of people chiming in on what Water was speaking about there. Kristen says that her father was born in a hospital that also no longer exists in Utah. They're Bingham Canyon, Utah. Now just a space inside a giant open pit mine. Yeah, I think this story, that's something that we found over and over as well. It's like if we tell the story, I say in the story that it's my story, right? That it's my family story because it was passed down to me. But we hear from people from West Virginia. We have a community outreach element of this production, and I don't have footage of that in the show right now, but we had some community outreach of some interviews that we had done at a local library in Wayne, where we share the stories that my father shared with me, and we asked for their stories, and folks come back and they say, my gosh, this is the exact same kind of thing. And we ask questions, we try to stay really objective and say, did this affect you? How did this affect you when your family's land was taken? Or what types of rituals did your grandparents or granny do? And the things that we've heard have been wonderful, been incredible. Over and over, we hear that this is not just a single person or a single family story, even a single community story. I've heard obviously all through the Appalachians, through Ohio and Pennsylvania, Kentucky, West Virginia, and here Kristen's talking about her family facing something similar in a copper mine in Utah. That's a really great point. There's a great point here by Kong. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, Kong. So we don't only take the land from the original natives, but also the American natives in the name of the greater good. I think that's something that I could actually do a better job at. So thank you for reminding us of that, is that, we use the term settled, that it was settled by the Appalachian Mountains were settled by, in the late 1800s. The history books will tell us that the Appalachians were some of the last territories in the U.S. To be settled, even after the Western expansion, because there's so many mountain hollers and places to hide. But that story isn't quite the whole story, right? My family's land was stolen, right? Through eminent domain. It was condemned, but we should not forget that land was stolen by our America's first people that came before us, that land was theirs as well. So there's a history here of continued theft, even from the thieves themselves. Oh boy, so many questions here. I'm trying to make my way through the messages here. Kong again says, this one's for Jake. How did you figure out what aperture settings needed to be? Were there still ability to use a light meter? I'm assuming Kong means
Yeah.
in the
Shadow.
shadow
Yeah.
sequences that were filmed.
So great question, Kang. You take your light meter, and what you're metering for is actually the bright areas of the screen. So you take your light meter, you put it up to the screen, meter the light areas because you want the shadows to be dark. So you're trying to get the exposure on the light area. So when we were taking a reading, for example, we were at f1.8. So it was your aperture and your lens is as wide as it can be, and you're shooting at 12 frames per second. And you're rating your film that's 200 at 400. So you're trying to get as much as you can get light you can get on
All
the
the
film.
tricks.
All the tricks are pulled for this. And then, yeah, the chemistry does the rest by pushing it, by developing it longer. So when you develop it longer in the chemistry and developer, it pushes the contrast and makes your film, you're treating your film like faster. So in a movie that's all about shadow, go ahead, push the contrast. You're not going to like crush out details in shadows because you want the shadow. And you want those bright light, to be bright around the shadows. So great question. Yeah, you can take your light meter and meter the screen. You're metering the highlights of the screen.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a mind bender again if you're not familiar with it, if you don't live it and breathe it like Jake, because what we're saying there basically is that you're always working in, well, not always, but often working in negative with film, but in a shadow sequence you're filming the light because you're always filming the light, but the light in our case is the absence of picture because we're filming the negative space, which is the shadow, in order to create a positive. Like it's this cyclic loop back and forth, which reminds me, cyclic is kind of a theme with this show. That was something Water and I talked about. Storytelling in general is cyclic in that the story is told again and again, right? And the players may change, but the stories are told, and as soon as they finish, they can easily start again. And Water, you and I spoke early on in our process with The Sound of Mist about that kind of cyclic nature and bringing some returns and reframes to those kind of the sounds and the soundscapes that we create for the show. I wonder if you'd speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, so originally, I was thinking, going back and forth with the struggle of, I'm just gonna sit and just let whatever happens happen. And also, like, my type A tendencies, it's like, I have to get this down. Like, I have a timeline. I have to figure out what I'm doing. And Steven's like, you'll get it. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm trained as a performer. Like, all of this stuff is given to me. I have direction. Like, I have sheet music, all of these things are supplied. So I had this funny idea. I was driving and I was just thinking and trying to get out of my own way, like I always am. Get out of my own way, get out of my own way. And I thought, wouldn't it be funny if I just worked on chords that spelled out dad? And so,
which I thought was hilarious. And I was like, is this going to be too, and I thought, is this going to be too ham-handed? Like, is this going to be like really awkward and weird? Like, because we're trying to force this weird concept. Like, is it actually going to sound really corny?
It was a funny idea. And I just started laughing, smacking my leg like I'm such a dork. And then, so I usually work in my own music. I love using alternate tunings. It's something that I adore. And it's another method that I use to get out of my own way, because the more alternate tunings that I have, the less I really think about it and the more that I can just listen. And it's amazing what happens. It's kind of like a secretive opening portals as a musician. When you try new things that you haven't tried before, when you try new colors as an artist or a painter, so that's what I did. I started using the DADGAD tuning. or lower drop D tuning. And I really focused on using D, A, D chords. But I also added a little mystic in that process by using unfinished chords.
Mm-hmm.
So there's never really a true major D. There's never really a true major A. We're in this liminal space musically where there's not resolve, and there's also potential. Like it could go into a major chord. It also could go into a minor chord, but we're in neither. So we're really working in the non-binary, in the gray space, like all, the gray scale. And that's what I really tried to focus on musically. That's what I went with, and it worked.
It really worked. I mean, it really worked. Again, that ethereal, it's there, it's not there, it could, it's full of potential, it goes, it comes back. Even the word dad is a palindrome, right? The same forward as backwards, right? All of these things kind of start as a crazy thought or an idea, like, hey, let's go to West Virginia with a camera crew. Let's let's write some music in the key of dad.
And the beautiful thing is, like, if you look at tunings for dulcimers, they're in mixolydian. That's what the scales are called, mixolydian, which allows you more space and room to explore. It sort of creates this drone-like effect, which really moves us back towards like Irish ancestry and beyond, where there's a lot of this drone. If you ever sit and play or listen to dulcimer music, there's a lot of that drone, that continual steady root note in everything that they play. And that in itself, historically through music, has been a way for people to open up a spiritual landscape. And you can see that across. Are you there?
Oh, we're here.
Did I lose everybody?
No, we're here. We're in and out, I think.
Are you there?
Yes, we're here.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that was divine source dropping in, you guys.
Dropping into your Wi-Fi there.
That's kind of what I found happening with the dulcimer.
That's really cool. That's a really cool process.
I think Stephen, just watching this is like a fresh version of the piece, and what I keep coming to is this image of digging and sort of releasing, kind of the ancestors, and I feel like from the music to the way that the different film elements have been combined into the performance and other images, to me it has this sort of unearthing quality. I mean, it's about the dig, but I mean of the treasure, but I think the sort of the form and the content and the way that you found artists to contribute to it and guiding us through that process has just been really exciting to see what Water has done with the music, and what Christopher did with the dreams and the puppet performance all seem to come together, to what we were doing in West Virginia with the cameras, but looking and searching.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Jake, for those words. I think we've lost Water, but it's probably time for us here. We're at about 8:35. So I want to thank everybody so much for coming to our performance. And I want to thank Water Light, our composer and folk medicine musician. I want to thank you, Jake, for being here with us, our cinematographer. I want to thank everybody at ARTSwego that helped fund this project and help us to bring Kayla in this year, as well as Christopher in last year, to work on this ongoing living project. We very much hope to be back in West Virginia at some point in time, but to do that, we have to have money. It's an unfortunate nature of the work that we do. If you have it in you, thanks to the great support of our sponsors and our donors, your tickets tonight were free. But if you have it in you, I ask you to dig deep there and send yourself to tinyurl.com/donate to Mist. that will forward you to our PayPal donation page. If you've got $1, awesome. If you've got a little bit more, we'd love to have that too. Stay in touch with us. Follow us on our Facebook page, fb.com/Thick and Peculiar Mist for more details. If and when we head back to West Virginia, which I hope we very much do, we'd love to meet up with you and hear your stories. And who knows, we may need some experts to help us with some archaeology. Oh, we've got Water back. Hi, Water. Thank you again so much for joining us for this very special production. We hope you share it with your friends. We're going to leave it up on YouTube here for at least a week or so. And we hope you share it with your friends and keep dreaming. Okay, folks, thanks so much. And have a wonderful evening and a great night's sleep. Hopefully with many dreams.
Thank you, Stephen.
Bye.
Bye.